The King of Podcasts Radio Network proudly presents the Broadcasters Podcast. Here is the King of Podcasts.
Since the beginning of February, I've been putting quite a bit of time towards radio again, which was always the original intent of this program. When I first started this series in 2018, one of the things that I always wanted to be able to have, more than anything, was be able to have a platform where I could talk about the state of radio. A medium that I have really, if radio was being programmed so well today, I mean, today, right now, we have TikTok, we have social media, we have television, we have, cable, movies, all that stuff. I try to ask myself, I remember how many hours I used to listen to the radio, or what didn't have Spotify, or, anything else streaming. And I got tired of the music I had in my collection. CDs that I had, thousands upon thousands, that I sold, a couple of years ago at a garage sale for $20. 4 different Case Logic 250 plus CD cases, sold them all. Encompassing so many years of using the music when I was on the air, or listening to it when I was in my car or on a stereo at home. Because we didn't worry about having all that music and having to go ahead and load it into a CD player, or load it into a cassette player, or load it onto a record player, right? We thought about all that, and I'm saying to myself, I get to the point where all those promo copies that I used to go and have, we are truly spoiled with streaming. There's no doubt about it. I mean, when I think about how many songs that Spotify will tell me I've listened to in a year, or how many hours I've listened to in a year, it still mesmerizes me. And I think about the fact that I have 4 curated playlists. By the way, if you want to go listen to them, they're at kingofpodcasts.com. If you want to go and find that and all my past episodes, links to all the different shows that I do, everything I do, kingofpodcasts.com. Look for that. Plus, remember, all my content's also on the YouTube channel, everything since 2018 as well. You can find all these episodes, plus my wrestling program, Wrestling is Real Podcast, and The Prayer of the Debaucherous, Podcasters Row, the original incarnation of the series, Creative Not Corporate. It's all there. Hundreds of interviews that I did, so much more. But I think about years ago, we used to have all this music, and I would go to Specs or Peaches or FYE, or I didn't get Sam Goodyear music thing because I was a little too late for that. But I remember going to the record store, CD Warehouse. Oh my God, I love that store. I used to go to all these places regularly to go buy music. And to think I used to pay $16.99 for a CD, a brand new CD, to make sure I've had 4 songs. At least 4 singles on a record that at least I heard that told me, okay, if I like those 4 songs, then I'm going to probably like the rest of the album, and I'll buy it. I'm not even an album buyer. I was never really an album buyer. I did because it was just what it was. But for me, it was always like, well, this is the music I want to listen to. I'd have to go and buy the whole album to listen to it, as opposed to a single. It was more logical to buy an album. Because the singles, they were on radio. And they might get run to the ground. We'd hear all of it. And I'll tell you this too. One of the lists I listen to now regularly, it's called All the Hits with the Hard Rock and Rap. They used to have the phrase in the 90s and 2000s, all the hits without the hard rock and rap. Whatever. But I'll tell you what, and I think of air checks. I used to record radio stations when I used to be out in events, or I used to just want to go and listen to something. I would go ahead and record just like everybody else. Hit the recorder, hear some song I wanted to hear. I'd hear the imaging, the liners, the promos, the hosts doing their thing on the radio, entertaining us every night, every day. And I think about how much I had that also going on the car and just being enjoyed by having somebody accompanying me in the music and playing all this great music for me and for all of us, and be able to go and call in for a request. Like, all this was really wonderful. And this was all before this total destruction of radio deregulation. I could pick this episode all I want. I could go ahead and go into this subject every week if I wanted to. But if I kept doing it, it would be not good for my mental health, because it saddens me that things happen the way they are where I can't listen to the radio like I used to, like I enjoyed. But this is just the way things are put together now. I mean, and I was there for 4 years, full-time to part-time at Clear Channel. And I saw what it was like to work in that corporate radio environment. I mean, you're there with all this equipment and all the music and all the resources. And listen, if you have the right talent and you give free reign to your hosts, imagine what you get to be able to do. Sometimes you might hear a little bit of that feeling of what radio used to be when you have radio hosts that are at an event, a live event, a concert, and they're on location. Sometimes that's really fun. And, you might get a chance to hear what radio hosts used to actually do and how they actually used to have fun and how much different it is to be contrived in the radio station. In the studio. And I look at the fact that my radio never gets touched. I barely go to AM FM. In my new car now that I've had since November, I barely even touched it. I did the other day because there are so many billboards right now for a new urban radio station that came in to compete against WMBX X102.3, the number one station in the market. There are new stations, WFLM, which was originally licensed to Fort Pierce. Now it's licensed to West Palm Beach with a 50,000 watt signal. And they're going head to head with X1023. Big time. 2 urban radio stations, black radio stations, basically. They're going at each other. Hip hop and R&B, both. The Flame is much more of a modern, more newer sounding hip hop and R&B station. X1023 more the throwbacks and R&B, more in that direction. These 2 stations are going and battling it out big time. And now we're at the point where, and at first, 102.3 here in West Palm Beach, when it first came up, and I want to say it was 2003, it might be coming up on 20 years. I think it just passed 20 years. It was 2002. When the station came on, it was hip hop and R&B, which we didn't even think we were going to have a station like that in West Palm Beach, let alone because we already had Miami that had a prominent, station in WEDR 99 Jams. We didn't need another hip hop station. I didn't think so, but that station came on board and it came up and everybody was all about it. And then that same company, right? They decided to also put an R&B hits and oldies station, and that was 106.3. For whatever reason, they decided, well, we're going to nix the other station because it was sold to ESPN Radio, to the son of Mel Karmazan, Steve Karmazan, and Good Karma Broadcasting. They took that station over and bought it, 106.3. And the fact is that they were able to go and get that sold off to them. And this was what? ESPN Radio had already been on 760 AM in West Palm Beach. And you know what? They started making some good money and they found themselves a way to go ahead and acquire 106.3. Not sure how they did it, but they did. And so as the hip hop music has started to wane off since the early 2000s, the music is not, we're not getting as much hip hop music being cranked out that's very mainstream and very popular. We can see it on the charts. Well, with rap music going on the decline, stations are obviously playing more throwbacks. With the less pop music that's being put in through radio stations, more throwbacks are being put in. I did an episode about that. And now we're at the point where a station that is independently owned is coming in now to take on a big corporate entity. X1023 here in West Palm Beach is owned by Hubbard Broadcasting, one of the top 10 radio companies in the country. it's those few little nuggets of interest that I have in hearing a new station. But the new station isn't necessarily going after X1023 with live and local. No. They have syndication. They have the Ricky Smiley Morning Show, which does run on Hot 105 in Miami and has been doing for years. Actually, originally it was on 99 Jams, and then they moved it to Hot 105 because now Ricky Smiley shows like more. It can be placed on a hip hop station or an R&B station. The adult R&B stations out there. So for the grown-ups, the old folks, right, or the youngins, right? What do they want to do? Now, with that said, here we go. I think there was one jock I see on the website that they have so far, but they're not loaded with people live. And there is a station right now that does play throwback hip hop music, and they do have people, and I'm pretty sure they're all on voice track for the most part. And so WFLM 104.7 The Flame has come into the market. They're on, but for the most part, they're on air, folks. They only have one guy as Reggie D live in the streets. And I believe he's on after. Yeah, but he's on 3 to 5. That's it. Otherwise, everyone else that you listen to, I don't even think they even have any other people on the air. That's it. That's all they got. I don't know if they're going to add more people or not. I don't know. I'm not sure what they're going to do. But they're set up. They're all put together and see what they're going to be able to do in terms of what they can do. Delta Media Corporation owns the station. I don't know of any other stations that they own, as a matter of fact. I could not tell you. Okay, so they own radio, TV, and digital platforms in Lafayette and Alexandria, Louisiana. 9 radio stations, 6 TV stations, and multiple digital and mobile platforms. Not a big company, but they got it. They're set up. And it is basically a corporate company, but at least they have a nice little setup to go ahead and put the station out there. We're able to get the station up on the right signal. It was actually owned by another company. And once the 104.7 50,000 watt signal was put together, they said, okay, selling it. So the only deals for radio stations to be done are to just sell. Like, hold on to it as a property and maybe just sell it to somebody else because somebody else might take it over. Right? We never know. Is there anything we can do about this deregulation problem? Well, we talked about that back in December because the SEC did do a quadrennial review of their process, and they said that the existing rules with minor modifications remain necessary in the public interest. The dual network rule, the local radio ownership rule, they decided to retain their normal existing points of how ownership are for radio stations. The existing local TV ownership rule ensures competition among local broadcasters while allowing for flexibility should the circumstances of local markets justify it. That's that. And then the other part, the local radio ownership rule, remains necessary to the Commission's public interest goals of competition, localism, and viewpoint diversity. We retain the current rule. The only modification we adopt is to make permanent the interim contour lap methodology, long used to determine ownership limits in areas outside of the boundaries of defined Nelson Audio metro markets and in Puerto Rico. Whatever. The bottom line is they don't want to make any changes to where things are. But, if the SEC were to intervene and change ownership limits, they could easily go ahead and do something where too many radio companies are running in the red. Some of them think by publicly trading on the risk that they can be delisted at any time or that their prices are always so meager. Okay. They're basically penny stocks. And as long as they do that, it doesn't matter. But radio is in dire straits in terms of finding any money to sustain the gorge, the greediness, the glutton of these corporate radio entities, okay, which are owned and operated in the most part by private equity or, hedge funds or whatever it is. You got to think about who is part of the ownership when they're part of this. And if they're not, they're still under these corporate rules where corporate type suits who are not radio people are running the stations. So the decisions of the day-to-day programming, the decisions of who gets to go on the air, they're not the radio people. If you let the radio people actually run the stations, they might actually get run better and they might actually do better overall. But they're not allowed to. We just continue to see. It used to be, and I said this a while back, a couple weeks ago. It used to be that radio stations only cared about, well, how much money can you make us? Because the radio people could make money with the talent that was on board, get local advertisers to come on board and buy. Okay? You could get that done. What are they getting so much now? Political advertising sometimes. Oh, that would be a nice little boost every quarter, one quarter a year to get all those political ads. But you know what? The political ads don't go to radio stations anymore. They're going everywhere else. For the most part, most of these radio companies, they don't see a tick in revenue or advertising overall. Let's talk about that. Before I do that, I want to do this. Charles D. Ferris. I make this note because he recently passed away. This was a couple weeks ago. He was a champion of deregulation at the FCC. He was appointed by President Jimmy Carter. He led the FCC through rapid technological change and argued that competition, not regulation, often better serve the public interest. So he's one of the people that are responsible for what happened here. Charles D. Ferris was a Washington lawyer who helped enact landmark civil rights legislation as a top aide to Senate Majority Leader Mike Mansfield. He ushered in an era of telecom deregulation as he headed the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission. He was chairman from 1977 to 1981, so during President Carter's administration. He loosened restrictions on radio, telephone, cable, satellite, and television industries, arguing that the public interest was often better served by a competitive marketplace rather than government regulators trying to play the role of referee. His tenure transformed, quote, how the FCC does business, according to, end quote, according to broadcast and media scholar Reed W. Smith. Deregulation, by the way, escalated during the Reagan administration. So this is not a political issue in terms of one side or the other does this. No, both sides. Both sides. The FCC allowed it. Mr. Ferris changed the FCC status from being a behind-the-times and sluggish agency to one that was being active and innovative, according to Smith in an article for the Journal for Radio and Audio Media. At the FCC, he took a firm hand in reshaping the organization, starting with more quotidian matters like staff hours, and then moved on to issues of public policy. And he wanted to loosen government oversight. He hired a bevy of economists to an agency that had long been staffed primarily by lawyers, arguing that unless regulations were improving the market, they were nothing but a nuisance. Under his direction, the agency removed regulations on telephone equipment, paved the way for consolidation between telephone and computer companies, notably by allowing AT&T to enter the computer field through a subsidiary, and also created a cable television boom, eliminating key restrictions on programming and satellite use, eliminating paperwork requirements for local radio broadcasters, simplifying the licensing procedure for new radio stations, and helping women and minorities qualify for broadcast station ownership. Critics charged that the policy changes he spearheaded, including the decision to eliminate time requirements on radio commercials and public affairs programming, were not entirely successful. No, they were not. His belief that public demand would lead to an outgrowth of public service programming has not been realized. Mr. Ferris's efforts to diversify station ownership also proved incomplete. A 2011 FCC study cited by Smith noted that 6% of the country's more than 18,000 broadcast stations were minority owned. Oh, how about that? So they were trying to go ahead and create diversity in ownership a long time ago. But the deregulation allowed companies to just pick up property and buy as much as they could. And when the deregulation continued to loosen, then more these corporate media entities decided to buy up more. So they've bought stations all these years. And when the changes really made the biggest one, President Clinton's FCC and the creation of the Telecommunications Act in 1996, basically eliminating deregulation or just creating full deregulation. It was just this pick apart thing that Mr. Ferris did, Charles Ferris. But he did it. And it was done. I'm like, not good. And so where are we at right now? There was recently a blog post from the Broadcast Law blog that was written by David Oxenford. And he wrote, just because the FCC can regulate broadcasting, should it? So he decides to write this because of the passing of the former FCC chair, Charlie Ferris. And he writes that since the administration of Chairman Ferris, the FCC has generally moved forward to implement the philosophy of eliminating unnecessary regulation, with only occasional consideration given to the restrainment of certain regulations. With the spate of recent rulings from the FCC, one questions whether the direction that Chairman Ferris pointed the FCC is now being slow to reverse at a time when the market may well be crying out for an increase in the speed of that deregulation. What else do these companies are able to even buy? Like, here's the thing. Who's going to buy these stations now? The companies that can't even get streaming off the ground? Like, what are you thinking you're going to do? All you're doing is, by deregulating, you're going to make it so that only the people with the cash can buy these stations out. And the ones that haven't been buying them out, they bought so many, they're overloaded, okay? And they can't make money off of any of them. Just because they had the money doesn't mean they were doing the public interest, because they can't make their stations do any good. They can't hire people. There's no room for employment. Well, how about that diversity and minority ownership? How about the people getting jobs? How many radio jobs are missing right now because of the ineptitude of what the FCC allowed, what the federal government allowed, and what all these big corporate companies have been doing to continue to micromanage all these stations, all these clusters, to be nothing. They're carcasses. They are hollow versions of themselves. And by the way, I was actually talking about the fact that, for those of us that have been in radio, we wanted to be in radio as our career because that's what we wanted to do our lives. And then radio took that away. Hey, podcasting, you can find a way to get and be able to monetize. I've been able to work in it for almost 20 years. I'm grateful for it, but like I said, the money's not all there. Like I can't make the kind of money that I would hope to make. Not even close, because there's not money. There's only so much money in it. So I've always had to do something else. But with radio, this was the career that I wanted. And all these people, there was a time where there were thousands upon thousands of radio jobs. And they're no longer allowed. Like, think of all these content creators. How many of them would have been radio if they would have had the chance? And not even have to use, your looks or, some kind of prop or demonstration or whatever it is. How about the people that had good voices? Knew their music, knew their discussion, their topics, and all this stuff. Look at the entertainment we could have had. And how many people could have learned by just doing audio, learn how to become people great for emceeing an event, live, tape, whatever, hosting a show, whatever kind of show you want. It's a long lost art. It is. Theater of the mind. You know how hard it is to go and think about the fact that, okay, you want to entertain people on a program, like, think about it for myself. For those of you that invest time on listening to me doing an hour of this podcast every week, and I come back here, I have to plan and prep. Tonight, I only have a couple of articles in front of me. I'm doing this off the cuff because this is easy for me. I can entertain. I can inform. I can do this because this is what I was trained to do. I helped get myself trained through a lot of experience and a lot of time behind a microphone. That's just like the one I have. And I've done it for a long time. And I still want to do it. I don't get tired of it. What I'm tired of is I can't appreciate other people getting to do the same thing that I love. You know how disheartening it is to listen to new music and say, hey, I want to talk about this song, but like somebody has to have a subscription to Spotify or Apple or iTunes or whatever. Like we can't say, hey, listen, you hear this song on the radio? Hey, check this out. We have to share social media clips. We have to share YouTube videos like this. It was like an event when you heard a new song. Hey, did you hear that new song from this person? Did you hear this going on the radio? Did you hear that contest? Did you hear what they said this morning? Think about all the jokes you might have had from somebody you might have heard on the radio, and you might have a joke. And you might have heard something really cool and interesting because a lot of other people talked about it. Because it was not just reading something from the paper or just reading something from online. You had feedback from other people or feedback yourself. You can go on and talk about it. Where is the court of public opinion? Where is the people out there that can actually talk and have feedback? Because think about it like this. And podcasting could never get it to where they can get call-ins and get that kind of feedback. No, now most podcasters, they get to the point where, well, we're subjected to go ahead and reading back comments from somebody from a previous episode. Not real-time contents right then and there. If we do, maybe a chat room. But how about like phone call? We don't get that anymore because nobody does it anymore. And even if it was 1% of the audience that goes in and calls in on a show. But at least those people would come on and call, and I would actually have something interesting to say. Because you had to stand out among others. So the deregulatory direction that Chairman Charlie Ferris took the FCC might not have been entirely successful based on the persistent lack of minority ownership of broadcast properties and a quote, unquote, shortage of local, professional, accountable reporting in many communities, end quote. But those failings ones that are attributable to the regulatory trends of the FCC or greater marketplace forces that have strained not just broadcasting but all traditional media? Yes, it is. Yeah, the FCC is to blame for this. They allowed it. They should have come in and stopped the deregulation. They should have continued to be regulating. Okay? I mean, if you want good, respectable broadcasting out there, you want public affairs programming, you want things to go out there and people enjoy radio. I mean, the FCC, as policing the radio stations, actually were doing a good thing. I didn't mind what they were doing. Like the follow FCC rules, okay, fine. I get it. And think of the fact of how many things you could do on radio in terms of getting the word out. If you want advocacy, you want people to go ahead and make an opinion, and whatever they're going to be doing, like fundraisers, drives, telethons, whatever kind of campaigns you want, whatever kind of messages you want out there, you got a public crowd out there, and people can listen to this thing at all at the same time in a very convenient format on a Walkman, in the car, in the home, whatever it was. They would find a radio and listen to it. In reading the media headlines in the last few weeks, this is going back to February, by the way, one can't help but conclude that the latter is more likely the cause, right? The greater marketplace forces that have strained not just broadcasting, but all traditional media. No, and that's absolutely true. The FCC allowed it, but corporate media destroyed it. They brought the regulation right now where the regulation and the corporate media being so greedy and gluttonous, they have brought radio to a dead end. Like, they can't. They're going to make radio die because they don't know how to make money off of it. Give me a radio station and I'll find the staff. I'll find the funding. I'll make it profitable. Radio people know how to make stations profitable. Okay? We can figure that out. All we need is the help of business people to go ahead and make sure the books are right. We can get the talent that we need. We can get the advertisers. We can make money to bring in money to operate. We take the money that we earn on advertising and inject it back into the stations. What does corporate do? Now, Chairman Ferris actually also said another thing that was really interesting back in this time as FCC chairman. He warned broadcasters, quote, if you cannot compete with new technologies, you will be overcome by them. He is spot on. But Chairman Ferris was wrong to open the door like he did. To open the door to deregulation and thinking that competition was going to be the right thing, But there's such a thing as competition was going to still be around anyway. All right. We had competition because we had multiple owners going after the same audience. The competition wasn't on the side of, how many stations you owned. It's what music. It was more about the music. It was more about the content, not what the stations are. The stations represented the music or the content, the conversations. And they used that to prop up the people that created those conversations, that played that music. Because for corporate radio broadcasters, they're just towers. They're just these stations that, they broadcast and they can make money off of it. But they don't know how to put what you need together to create great broadcasting. They don't know. They just know, well, if we just cut this, we'll make more money. This is how we'll make money. We can still make money without this. We can cut this out. We can cut this out. That's what corporate does. And when something disrupts them, think about COVID. Think of the pandemic. How many corporations have never been able to get people back in the office again? And then when they brought them back in the office, what do they get? People get railroaded over there. But there might be some good money in those companies because of how much they're actually making. But of course, there's a lot of gross misuse of funds and what they're doing over there. And, certain people don't make the money. So he goes on to say that deregulation, not marketplace forces, that is decreasing localism. To conclude that is to ignore the media marketplace generally. So you talk about the fact that the primary public radio operator in the Washington, D.C. market shuttered its digital local news service, laid off a significant number of news employees, and they cited the need to retrench to its audio reporting because too many media companies fail by trying to be all things to all people, leaving their value proposition diluted and weakened. In other words, there is too much competition to be successful with this local digital news site, with a public broadcaster acquired only a few years ago. Okay, but there's the part where you want to say, you want to feel like they should have had news divisions still around. The heyday of local radio, of commercial radio, had news broadcasts top and bottom of the hour. Like that was the thing they did. You would provide information all across the board. You can still do it. But, with these clusters, you can have news broadcasts on other stations. But the fact that radio doesn't want to go ahead and serve the public with multiple things for listeners to listen to. That was the thing we used to do as well. Because not only did you have the DJs or the hosts, have just calls and topics and all, or they would just play the music, they were also giving information. Contests, promos, charity events, local drives, getting you informed on various things. If it's daylight savings time coming up, or if there's rain or weather or traffic or whatever there is. All these stations used to have a thing where they used to do really well at it. Now it's all contrived and pre-recorded and nobody pays attention. The only reason they might have it is because they could put a sponsor on it. Because the sponsors what matter. And it's the same sponsor for everybody else, so it doesn't even matter. It doesn't make a difference. Now David Oxenrod asks, in the light of these nationwide trends, what should the FCC be doing? He says, seemingly they should be following the guidance of Chairman Ferris and eliminating the regulations unless they can be shown to clearly benefit the marketplace. I disagree. We could go back to the original way. So they've written about the questioning of the repeal of the main studio rule, the FCC's majority of the decision to reject any attempt to allow any more broadcast consolidation in local markets, to allow stations to bulk up to compete with digital media giants, and most recently the return of a form gathering employment data that cannot, for constitutional reasons, be used to enforce FCC affirmative action policies, and thus seemingly is nothing but, to use the words of Chairman Ferris, a nuisance to broadcasters. So he's talked about there's on the horizon proposals to reinstate the prohibition on 2 FM stations serving the same area, duplicating the program despite the lack of any evidence that, in the many years that the rule has been gone, there has been any widespread rush to eliminate unique programming on commonly owned local stations. But now there's an item on circulation among FCC commissioners that would impose on stations, apparently, nationwide a requirement to have any buyer of program time on a station, including local churches, business owners, and ethnic programmers, to complete an extensive questionnaire to be included in the station's public file to show that the programmers are not representatives of foreign governments, imposing paperwork obligations on thousands of stations merely because a handful of stations have sold program time to representatives of the Russian or Chinese governments. So he goes on to say that just because the FCC can regulate broadcasters, should it do so without an extensive record that the new regulations will directly bring about some public interest good? Imposing new paperwork requirements on broadcast stations already challenged by the economic ties of the media industry similarly flies in the face of the deregulated trends that were put over the last 40 years. The thing is that we need to go and see that the media marketplace they have right now for broadcasters, okay, they need to be multiple broadcasters. Because remember, having the small amount of broadcasters, they control the market. They can control how much people are being paid for. They're controlling the competition of other stations because they're eliminating them by buying them out. What kind of competition is that? It's one thing if all these radio companies were making, 5-10% quarterly in revenue, and they were debt free, or they were in such a good, so liquid with assets and collateral. Okay. If they were so flush with cash that holding on to a healthy amount of debt would have been fine. That's okay. But iHeartMedia is not that. Audacy is not that. Cumulus is not that. Urban One is not that. Salem Radio is not that. BC Broadcasting is not that. They're all holding debt. And how many of them are able to go ahead and pay off their debt right now? Wipe it clean. They can't. iHeartMedia went through bankruptcy. Audacy's going through bankruptcy and finishing up. Cumulus did it. Citadel did it. There's others. That's the way it is. So it's irresponsible. Okay, you want to have competition with broadcasters, newspapers, then the broadcasters that own these stations, they should be not allowed to operate these stations in debt, in the kind of debt that they can't pay off. They don't get a pass. Okay? You don't let landlords that can't pay they can't pay for the properties that they have, you don't let them continue to go and collect rent. If they can't afford it, they have to sell. This is what needs to happen. It's time to call the markers on these radio companies and what they're owning. So you don't have to go and deregulate. No, of course not. But the FCC could do one thing. They should be able to go and put some kind of regulation in place that if these stations for the public interest, if they cannot retain ownership, if they are going to be delinquent in their interest payments, delinquent in their debt, any financial delinquency, okay, if they can't be financially solvent, then they must start letting go of radio stations in order to go and keep themselves. It's like the SEC. If a company gets, delisted or their stock goes away, they lose the right. They lose the privilege. Okay? Even if it's just an even amount. But these companies need to be handled. They need to be handled here and be put to the fire. Now, this is a story from David Axelrod, but let me go to another story that comes up. The ad revenue. Let's talk about that. The thing the corporate stations want to be able to do, right? Oh, we should be making, we just want to make money. That's what it used to be all the time. Because back when Chairman Ferris was in office, that's all these companies cared about. Milt Karmazin, when he ran Westinghouse Broadcasting, or he runs SiriusXM Radio, how much money are they making? Because that's all that mattered to him. How much money are they making? That's what they cared about. Think of all the stations we have out there, okay? Okay, think about WKRP in Cincinnati. Okay, Mother Carlson, right? Talking to her son Arthur Carlson, right? Big guy. Mrs. Carlson just cared about making money. Even after everything was done, she gave the chance for the rock and roll station to go and come on. Fine. Andy Travis got to run it, and they got it somewhere. And that's what they did. But that's according to that story, right? What about FM, the movie FM? Same thing. Ownership wants money to be made. So a story came out recently From seekingalpha.com. And I want to take this story that's being talked about in various stories when it comes to radio stations and the struggle they're all in. There's a lot to be said about it. Cumulus Media is one of the companies they're focusing on. So Cumulus Media right now is simultaneously enacting a poison pill defense against a potential hostile takeover and embarking on debt restructuring. Their proposed debt restructuring aims to reduce total debt and extend its maturity to 2029. So 5-year plan to get rid of their debt. Reduce the debt, not remove it, reduce it. So currently, they reported 2023 results a couple of weeks ago, Cumulus Media. Fourth quarter fiscal year 2023 results were basically in line with expectations. Total revenues for the year shrank, down 11.4% compared to last year, to 2022. And their EBITDA shrank to $90.7 million. The company announced an exchange offer, consent solicitation to address its 2026 debt wall. 2023, Cumulus used their operating cash flow along with excess liquidity to buy back $7.2 million of stock and $44 million in face value of debt at a discount to par. With limited visibility into 2024 ad bookings due to an uncertain macroeconomic environment, Cumulus's management have seen their options for dealing with the company's debt in 2026 maturities becoming more and more limited. Yeah, they got money to pay off. They have to pay off some of their debt by 2026. As a result, a debt restructuring through negotiations with creditors might have appeared the only viable solution to remove the financial insecurity and give the company more room to execute a much-needed turnaround. So you're talking about the fact that Cumulus Media adopted a limited duration shareholder rights plan in response to the significant accumulation of stock by Renew Group Private Limited, a Singapore-based company owned by Manoj Bhargava. And during meetings with the company's leadership, Renew Group revealed its intention to increase its ownership to 20% of Cumulus shares, a strong vote of confidence into Cumulus Media's future. And there's all this talk about their lien and all their first notes and all this stuff and whatever. The S&P is already anticipating that it will consider the proposed debt restructuring as distressed because the company's lenders will receive less than what they were originally promised. So all these shareholders, they keep losing money on putting money into these stations. Why are they allowed to go and continue to be running on here on a deficit? I mean, of course, all these people that are putting money into stock for radio stations, yeah, they keep losing their ass on it, and I guess people don't mind it. But it's also the fact that these companies continue to be operated as such. They go on to talk about the current dynamics of the traditional radio industry. So they go back and refer to COVID-19. It's been 4 years now, but it impacted how people listen to radio. No, this problem was a bigger problem much sooner than that. You can't use 2020 as an excuse. I'm sorry. It's somewhat of an excuse, but not even close to what it should be. Unlike other sectors that have fully recovered, traditional radio is still struggling because advertisers are increasingly shifting their budgets to digital platforms, which offer them better targeting, measurement, and reporting tools. The radio station business is forecasted to decline in the next few years, although at a relatively slow pace. We keep hearing that. Kagan Research talks about this. A decline in U.S. radio ad revenue of 0.9% to $11.86 billion in 2024. Roughly $1 billion higher than the radio ad revenue in the pandemic ad recession of 2020, but still approximately $2 billion lower than pre-pandemic levels. And even at that time, all these major radio companies continue to go ahead and just lay off people, continue to downsize and micromanage. On the positive side, they say radio advertising remains a powerful tool for reaching audiences. Sure, we hear that all the time, but who's buying it? It's unaffordable. It's not good. And they play commercials so much. No one's going to listen to 16 minutes or 18 minutes of commercials. It's not going to happen. Not anymore. iHeart Media, Audacy, Cumulus Media represent the three largest players in the sector, and all of them have been through a court-supervised restructuring, with Audacy now in the process to emerge from bankruptcy. And when it comes to Audacy, they say that 2024 should benefit from political advertising, and that management expects political revenue to fluctuate with midterm and presidential election cycles. No. They think they're going to make all this money in the next 4 years. Please. So to resume operations, to keep going, they did sell off a couple of non-core stations in 2023, securing attractive pricing and multiples. And to resume, they also reduced fixed costs, recovered EBITDA margins, improved free cash flow generation. And if successful, the debt exchange could represent the company's last major financial step towards executing its turnaround. They're not going to they're not going to pay off their debt. It's not going to happen. The national media accounts of Cumulus Media approximate for 45% of total revenues. Local business, local spots, local digital marketing services, local podcasting, local streaming, 50% of total revenues. What's going on there? Why is it that national advertising is making up half of all these stations' revenues? Why can't these stations just operate on a local level and make money individually? Because these companies, as a corporate entity, must micromanage everything. They need to be having their hands on all the money that comes in. They can't let that many people handle all the bills that come in or handle all the revenue that comes in. They're not going to allow it. So they try to say that radio advertising is a powerful tool for reaching audience. No, it's not. You can keep saying it about yourself. You can keep thinking that, but it's just not true. It's not. And I don't know what else to go ahead and say that will make me feel any better about it. But it's a shame that we had this going on. Because in this time right now where we've talked about TikTok, or actually Universal Music itself, Universal Music right now is an uproar. They're just they're just wailing and crying and bitching and moaning about not making enough money because the music industry is also hurting. But by the way, in the music industry, if you haven't heard, a lot of the jobs that have been getting laid off, most of those were radio promotion. So whatever was left of the radio promotion for these music labels, the record labels, they've been eliminated. Basically, radio promotion right now is nothing. Nothing. No more calls to music directors. No more calls to, the radio calls. They used to have weekly calls to a station to promote particular artists, right? The labels would be talking to the program directors or the music directors. I had those calls. I remember those. And having various people from various labels, hey, push this music. I want to get you a package out. I want to get you this and that. We're going to get this music out. And I'll report back to them. I used to report to CMJ, College Music Journal. I reported to Urban Network. And we reported the music that was going on. And it was great to do that. And I can't tell you how many songs I remember breaking because of, what these record labels just do for us. Because that was them that would allow us to get the music out there. Doesn't matter which company it was. As long as they knew we were a radio station that can get music out to an audience, they would. Look at all these artists right now. Put it like this. How about the artists right now? I hear certain artists that I'll hear their music for the first time. And I'm saying to myself, man, if I was a music director right now, if I was a program director and I hear a song right now on the radio, I would give this song a shot. And I'd put it on the air and let the audience decide if the song's going to go well or not. Let's put it out there. We used to have, the competition. Here's a champion, here's a challenger. And who would outseed, who would, overrun the reigning champion? That was fun back in the day. When the charts and seeing who would make the charts would be very important. To get the songs on the charts, how many times have we had radio be responsible for breaking a song that would make it up there? Some of the best stories I've ever heard is hearing how Billy Joel made his career in a Philadelphia radio station, playing his music because he recorded him in a live concert and getting Piano Man to go on the air and become a hit. Shaggy, It Wasn't Me, right? #1 song around the world. And a station in Honolulu, Hawaii. The guy in, 2000, he found the song, he heard it, and he was like, he went to Napster and he found some peer-to-peer site like a Napster to download the album, and he picked the song and he put it on the air and it blew up. And the record label for Shaggy, they were giving up on it. They thought, nobody's going to listen to this. None of this reggae stuff. They were wrong. I still think of the song Sonique's Feel So Good, 1999. Stan Priest at WFLZ broke the song. But that should be the thing. There used to be a lot of songs that got broken by DJs. All of a sudden, they started playing it, and all of a sudden, people hear it. And then it just gets a groundswell of support. Think about all these artists that they had a chance to perform live or get interviewed at radio stations, and that could still happen. And by the way, if they were going to these radio stations, repurpose on social media. Yes. Hey, get your social media going so you get people to go ahead and listen to your radio stations. Ooh, that's good. Ooh, that's smart. It's not hard anymore. But the thing is, you can't even have the fun of doing that either because of the fact that, radio people, they have to now do it as a requirement under a certain filter, under a certain way they have to go and create social media content. How about letting them be creative and do something that will be interesting and fun? You're not allowed to do that. That's why there's not a lot of radio people that are very successful at doing that on the regular basis. Because, they might go ahead and talk up records and this and that here and there. Fine. But what about they get to talk, you can see them doing interviews with their hosts or out in concerts. Or they can do other things where they can be a little bit creative and show their personality. But radio stations don't want that. No, you're going to follow this format. You're going to talk about the artist. You can do this. And we're going to keep everything within this certain narrative, this certain direction. And you can't deviate from it. Bullshit. I could go on, but I'm gonna stop because this broken record needs to stop playing. I will just table it for now. There will be something else that will stir me up again, but I'll wait to talk about that another time. Few other headlines I want to get into right now. Let's get into music. So Universal Music right now, they have a Pandora's a policy change. They're starting to change accounting for Pandora royalties. Now that Pandora is now introduced on-demand streaming. It's revolving $135 million in annual artist royalties. So it's not enough that they're doing things right now where they're upset with TikTok. Now they want to go ahead and decide to go on a rampage and go after other streaming services. So now Pandora is their latest target. So for years, Pandora paid 50% of song royalties to the artist through Sound Exchange. But now artists signed to Universal Music Group were receiving a much lower percentage, similar to what they were getting from on-demand streaming from services like Spotify and YouTube. And the payments now are arriving directly from UMG instead. So now Pandora revenue, Universal Music was able to change the way it reported Pandora revenue because Pandora itself changed. In 2016, they evolved from a webcaster to a Spotify-style search and play what you want model. And now they offer an interactive service rather than a non-interactive webcaster and needed to make new deals with labels rather than relying on a government-mandated compulsory license at a standardized rate. So Universal Music Group and other labels were able to change the flow of royalties so they collected and paid them directly rather than Sound Exchange, distributing the artists as law mandates under these compulsory licenses. And UMG's change of policy last year made it the first and only label so far to take advantage of the change. And because of the Sound Exchange deal, Universal Music Group contributed $135 million to Sound Exchange as part of its Pandora share for artists. But now there's many Universal Music artists that are unrecouped. They have not yet to earn back the money the label spent on recording, marketing, other costs. A worrisome amount, zero. Acts were previously being paid by Sound Exchange, so their unrecouped status with UMG was not an issue for these royalties. A lot is being withheld and it feels like a grab for money from the labels. Right. To allow the labels now to handle the divvying of funds that Sound Exchange used to receive and used to give out easily. Universal Music wanted to cut out the middleman. And now they're going to just start taxing more on the artists. And in some cases, they might not even make their money back. Pandora struggled in recent years, but monthly users have dropped almost in half, by the way, 81 million in 2014 to 46 million in 2023. It's still a potential potent outlet for hitmakers like SZA, Megan Thee Stallion, Little Durk, and other artists like contemporary Christian singer Lauren Daigle. Newer artists rely on the exposure. Pandora royalties have provided crucial revenue while they absorb touring and merch expenses. If you're making millions of dollars, quote, this isn't going to have a big impact on you. So Universal Music representative responded by explaining the difference between interactive, like Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Music, and non-interactive streaming services like internet radio. So recording royalties are subject, quote, to direct negotiation between an individual rights owner and the service. And Pandora has substantially changed its functionality such that it has evolved into an interactive service where users can select tracks on demand. So the label has every right to make this change. Well, but UMG didn't fully change the way it reported royalties to artists until 2022, and it caught many business managers and music attorneys by surprise. That is sad, but it's obviously being done. What the hell's going on? I'll take one story from the movies real quick. Marvel Studios is reportedly shelving movie sequel plans for 3 of their big box office bombs. So here's what we got. There were 3 potential sequels. And here's what it is. Marvel had a plan to do an Eternals 2. It's now on indefinite hold, which is somewhat surprisingly drawn the most ire from MCU fans. It earned $402 million globally, but did not get a good score on Rotten Tomatoes, 47%. It was the biggest subsidiary flop since Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania, which also got a 46% Rotten Tomatoes rating and replaced Eternals as the worst rated MCU film of all time. So there were thoughts that Eternals 2 would see the light of day, but now Marvel's reevaluating which movies and Disney Plus shows it wants to develop. And it's not being part of their Marvel Phase 5 or Phase 6 plans. Then there's talk about Ant-Man 4 and Captain Marvel 3. Well, those are also going to get dropped. So, Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania, slammed by critics. Also bad ratings, as we just said. And Captain Marvel, the same thing. Big changes going on. And then, of course, I see the story from Tech Radar. They actually mentioned the pricing on Disney Plus. You can either buy at $7.99 a month for the basic, $13.99 a month, or $139.99 a year for the annual premium. Wow. And this story talks about all these Marvel projects that are not going to be out there. And how many people were out there that wanted to go and catch it? Also, there was a big talk about the X-Men 97 creator being axed just days before Disney Plus' show launch. So much more. Yeah, superhero movies. You notice we haven't had any this year. None. Nada. They're all going back to the drawing board. That's very interesting. But it's made for a very interesting year of movies, by the way. I mean, what we're getting right now are franchises that are coming out. Just other movies are coming out instead. Which I don't mind that much anyway, for me. Like, I don't mind that part. I'll take that. Because at the moment, it's getting a little bit better. Like, I mean, for the moment, there's not a lot of movies that we can get that are really like going out there and going really crazy, but like, for the most part, I'm enjoying it. The box office this year so far, it's made over $1 billion so far this year. And Dune Part 2 right now is most responsible for it. They are making the big bucks right now. It's the most grossing movie, $384 million so far. And this is what, in 1 week? What day was it that came out? I don't forget what it was. Oh, that's right. 25th. It was March 1st. So roughly 2 weeks in, this money's banking right now. Dune is doing very well. And dare I say, I might even go see it again because it was that good. Bob Marley One Love right now is second most at $90 million gross at the moment. Wonka, $84 million, which is a holder from 2023. Kung Fu Panda right now is up $73 million. Mean Girls, Migration, Beekeeper, Anyone But You, Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, and Argyle round out the top 10. That's not a good start. But as we know, there are better movies on the horizon that are going to be coming up, and some big major franchises are going to be coming back as well. So we got that to look forward to. And that's how we're going to leave things right now. In the meantime, that's the show for tonight. Thanks for listening in. again, kingofpodcasts.com. And I hope you enjoyed. For those who decided to stay around for this whole talk about radio, listen, I know it's not the sexiest thing they're going to talk about, and people might not be much into it. I understand that part, and I can appreciate why you feel that way. That's okay. But for me, it's everything. I want radio to get itself back to where it should be. I don't like seeing that these companies are allowed to go ahead and run roughshod and just destroy these companies altogether. When people like me and other broadcasters out there could create diversity, inclusion, music, fun, entertainment, talk, everything else. Brings a little more fun, a little more laughter, a little more entertainment out there. Would be nice, wouldn't it be? So come back for another Broadcasters podcast. And remember that content is king, and the control of your content is in your hands.